Hey students, this is lesson 11.7. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to graph rational functions. Some really important vocab, so carefully go through that, and I'll check back with you. All right, so we talked about inverse variations in the last lesson, and we get those from rational functions. And if you remember, a rational function is any time you have two polynomials divided and the denominator can't equal 0. What we're going to do is take a closer look at what it looks like when we graph those. First of all, it's important to understand that there are some excluded values. We have to make sure we're not dividing by 0. So the excluded values occur when the denominator is 0. So let's find that right here. If x plus 3 equals 0, that means that x would equal -3. So this function right here is undefined when x equals -3 because you'd be dividing by 0. So the excluded value is -3. And in this function, if x minus 4 equals 0, that means that x equals 4. And so the excluded value is x equals 4. All right, you try that. Okay, in this problem we're going to find the vertical asymptote, and the vertical asymptote occurs where the excluded x values are. So if we look at this graph right here, 3 divided by x plus 1, if x plus 1 equals 0, then x equals -1 is a value that is not part of this graph. So at that spot, x equals -1, we're going to put a dotted line, and that represents the vertical asymptote. So right there. And that helps us make a graph. Now we're going to graph the function. And we just need some values here to help us out graphing this. So I'm going to make a table of values, and I'll just use values like -5, -4, -3, -2, -1, 0. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we'll see what happens there. So when x is -5, y is 3 divided by -5 plus 1. Well, that's -4. So 3 divided by -4 is -0.75. I'm going to go ahead and pause here and fill in the rest of those values. So I got my table of values. Now I'm just going to graph those when x is -5 and y is -0.75. 4 is -1. -3 is -1.5. -2 is -3. And then it goes undefined, and we can start to see what's going on this side. It looks like that. And on the other side, when x is 1, y is 1.5. X is 2, y is 1. X is 3, y is 0.75. 0.6, 0.5. You can see that we're going down. We also have a point at 0.3, so here's our graph here. And notice that that line tells us where it's never going to hit. You can see that there's going to be another asymptote right here at y equals 0. That's going to be the other spot that it never hits. Go ahead and do problem number 2. I'll check back with you. All right, concept summary here. A rational function can be written in this general form. And when you do that, your vertical asymptote is going to be where x is equal to b, and the horizontal where y is equal to c. And there's an example for you to look at. Go ahead and try 8 and 9, and I'll check back with you. All right, we're going to use that information to help us graph this. So if we can find the horizontal asymptote and the vertical asymptote, then we can just quickly sketch the graph. So let's do that. So remember, our form is this: y is equal to a over x minus b plus c, where the horizontal asymptote is y equals c. And this problem, y, that would be 3. So let's go ahead and put that line on y equals 3. And y equals 3 is right there. And then our vertical asymptote is going to be at x equals b. And in this case, we're subtracting 2. So x equals 2. We'll put that on there. So x equals 2 is right there. And then we're just going to make a sketch of this graph. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But since there is no negative value in this function, we're going to have our normal hyperbola. And that's going to look something like this. If we want to get a little more accurate, we can make sure we hit a couple of the points on there. Go ahead and try problem 3. All right, let's solve the problem using some of this information. It says a zoo charges $250 for a group field trip tour. The cost will be divided equally among the students and teachers on the field. In addition to this, each person will need $5 for lunch. What equation gives the total cost per person, y, of going on the field trip as a function of the number of people, x, who go on the trip? So x is the number of people. So it costs $250 for the group, so we need to divide that by the x people. So we're going to put $250 divided by x. But each person will need $5, so we're going to add 5 on for each person. So the cost per person is $250 divided by x plus $5. So what is the graph of the function? Use graph to describe the change in cost per person. Let's get the let's start by getting the asymptotes, and we'll talk about. Well, let's make a scale first. So I think this is going to be a number of people going on this trip. So let's use a scale like maybe 5 here. This is a number of people. Okay, and then the cost for the trip. So you have to imagine, what if there were 50 people going, then the cost would be 250 divided by 50, so that's about 10. And if there was if hardly anybody goes, then the cost would be really high. So like if 5 people went, the cost would be 55. So I think a scale of 5 on this axis also. And this is the cost per person. All right, and now let's talk about the asymptotes here. So we need to graph this. So looking at this, it looks like our horizontal asymptote, since we're not subtracting any, since we're adding 5, our horizontal asymptote is going to be at 5. So y equals 5 will be a horizontal asymptote. And since underneath this equation, we just have x. It's not x minus anything, so we have to think of it as x minus 0. So our vertical asymptote is going to be at x equals 0. So just thinking about that, we can draw a line here, and we can use the y-axis for the vertical asymptote. And now, let's just make a table of values for this. So I'm going to say, so this is my number of people. I'm going to go, and I'm not going to go down to 0, but we'll go 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50, and we'll find those values. So I went ahead and graphed this, and we can see that it's an inverse variation going on here. So the cost per person varies inversely with the number of people going, and if people go, it costs about $10 per person. Go ahead, you try that. All right, go ahead and do the lesson check, and we'll talk more about this when we do class next time.